Welcome to class. Today we are going to talk about linguistic diversity and language movements in India. As we discussed in our last class, uh, the linguistic identity and an urge to assert this linguistic identity sometimes leads to a violent conflict, and in the history we can see the recent example of Bangladesh, creation of Bangladesh, erstwhile East Pakistan, which was triggered by language movement in 1952 and turned out to be a political movement and finally got separated from erstwhile Pakistan and now Bangladesh. The history of Southeast Asia is full of such movements. Some movements turned into violent protests and ultimately a lot of bloodshed shed. Case of Sri Lanka for that matter, Sinhalese versus Tamil. Case of Bangladesh for that matter, uh, Urdu versus Bangla. But India is an exception. We have a diverse situation, linguistically diverse situation here, but for hundreds of years, we have been staying together in harmony and peace with this diversity. That's the strength of our society. However, there are some demands and undercurrents that we will talk about today. So, we are going to talk about linguistic diversity and language movements in India. Now, we need to understand the idea called linguistic identity. Identity is an umbrella term, and we have multi-layer identity. We constitute our social identity, construct our identity in different contexts with different markers. So, gender, class, caste, region, religion, and language, they are indexes, right? And when I say I am a Hindi speaker, right, I construct my identity as a Hindi speaker in terms of announcing my membership to Hindi speech community and identify with language Hindi. If I am a Tamil speaker, a Tamil identity. But we need to understand that the idea called identity, linguistic identity, you know, language is not simply means of communication, a tool for communication. It goes beyond that and it becomes a single thread, a bonding factor to organize communities. It is a vigorous marker of our identity. We constitute linguistic identity along with the linguistic allegiance, right? Uh, so, as a multilingual individual, I have multilingual identities. As a Hindi speaker, I speak Bhojpuri. I become a Bhojpuri speaker in some certain group. I'm a Hindi speaker for a larger group. I'm an English speaker. So these languages create you know circles, circles, and we constitute our identity, construct our identity within those circles. So it's a very complex phenomenon and it is multi-layered. Now we need to understand speakers of certain language may feel oppressed or neglected if their language is not given formal recognition and equal support, right? Uh, so this discrimination, they may feel discriminated, and because when they find that their language does not get value, it threatens their very very basis, roots of their linguistic identity. And such sense of neglect in the history of the world has led to a number of violent protests, and that was aggravated to a level where we have seen the instances of separation, like Bangladesh for that matter is the best example, recent example. Bangladesh war 1971, which started long back on 21st February 1952, the language movement in favor of Bangla when Urdu was imposed, and that movement, and then we had a violent protest, then the firing, then the death of the activists, and which led to Mukti Vahini, and then finally separation from erstwhile Pakistan. Take the example of Tamil and Sinhalese, conflict in Sri Lanka, right? So it's not simply a political conflict; it has origins in language and culture. The Sinhalese versus Tamil in Sri Lanka, for that matter, and we have seen the decades of bloodshed. Look at the cases in Spain, for that matter. Look at the cases of Quebec and in Canada, for that matter, or Scottish and Scots in Scotland, for that matter, in Ireland, for that matter, right? So, such sense of neglect of the language and practicing culture may lead to violent protests, and we have seen all around. Uh, our social order is developed alongside our linguistic allegiance. We form communities, speech communities, and we have, I know, our linguistic identity. You might recall we talked about Martha Vineyard Island case study by William Lebov, and where the linguistic expression became a tool to assert linguistic identity. And the islanders, in order to distinguish themselves from the visitors in summer, deliberately and consciously used some linguistic structures like the diphthongs, centralized diphthongs, uh, you know, to make sure that they sound different. They wanted to sound different, to be different, to assert their difference. So we versus them. And you remember that Martha Vineyard Island case study we did in our class. And it happens all around, right? So, social order. So William Lebov also demonstrated how linguistic structures are related to social structures. So language becomes a vigorous marker of our identity, and it constitutes a community, speech community. It becomes a bonding factor, a common thread which binds the members of the speech community. And this allegiance, linguistic allegiance, allow us to have shared narratives, our collective memories, our common social history. So it's a binding factor and very sensitive and emotional index. You take the case of Bangla in Bangladesh, for that matter. Even the religion could not keep them together. It was such a strong bond that even the religion could not take them together, keep them together. And East Pakistan and West Pakistan both had the Islam followers in majority. Still, they couldn't stay together because of linguistic movement that started in 1952 and culminated into separation in 1971. Uh, so, language does not simply remain a social object, but rather it is one of the most significant determiners of our associations and social functions. We derive meaning through it and construct a multi-layered identity that situates us in a given socio-political space. So that's the function of language, that's the role of language, that's the significance of language. And this linguistic identity and assertion, right, it's so significant. Gibson, 2004, opines. I quote from him: language is intrinsic to the expression of culture. Language is a fundamental aspect of cultural identity. It is the means by which we convey our innermost self from generations to generations. It is through language that we transmit and express our culture and its values. Language, both code and content, is a complicated dance between internal and external interpretations of our identity. It's wonderfully portrayed here. I unquote, wonderfully portrayed here by Gibson, that language is so critical and crucial in construction of our identity. Language becomes both the means and the end in terms of encoding the culture. And if you want to understand the culture, you need to understand the language. So we get into the cultural terrain through language. Language becomes instrumental in constructing and asserting our identity. And it has cultural, social, political manifestations. So it's not simply a means of communication that we need to understand, right? The role of language and the linguistic identity became more prominent after we see the second half of 20th century, when we see a series of countries, a number of countries getting out of the shackles of colonial powers. And then we see the emergence of a new field, language policy and planning. Why this policy and planning was required? And then you suddenly see the demand, agitations and protests in favor or against a particular language, right? So that's very important to understand. Now, if you look at multilingual manifestation and linguistic tension in India, you need to understand there are three, core uh, resources which will give you a fundamental understanding of these issues. So you need to understand and study the report of Indian Statutory Commission 1930, then report of the Linguistic Provinces Commission 1948, and report of the Indian States Reorganization Commission 1955. I will not go into details of these commissions and reports. That's not the thrust of this class today. But you can separately look at all these reports. The excerpts of these reports and recommendations are available online resources. You can search for them and you can study them on your own. But these resources give a very brief and clear picture of linguistic situation and diverse linguistic situation and undercurrents of the aspirations of speakers of languages in pre and post independent India. And we see that 1940, 1950, 63 and 65 and then 68, then 86, these are the years which are very relevant for uh, understanding linguistic policy planning and situation. In 1950, 26 January, we adopted our constitution. Then you know the story. Hindi was voted as official language at the federal central level, right? And a period of 15 years was given to Hindi to emerge as, to replace English as official language. English was adopted as associate official language. And then we have already talked about how the agitation against Hindi, anti-Hindi protests started in Madras, erstwhile Madras Presidency, and which gradually spread over in non-Hindi states. A sense of insecurity generated, and they claimed in courts hegemonic expansion of Hindi. All such things happened, and then we see before the 15-year window period was about to end, these protests, and in redressal of these protests, Government of India and then Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru was our Prime Minister, called a joint session of the Parliament. Official Language Act was amended, and we see the declaration in 1963 and in 1965 as well. And then we see English to be continued as associate official language sine die. So this is one major movement in post-independent India, anti-Hindi movement, specifically in South and particularly in erstwhile Madras Presidency. Uh, then we see, uh, you know, uh, three important documents. In fact, first document appeared in 1968, language, national policy on education. But before that, something else happened. A commission was constituted in 1964, Kothari Commission, that studied the situation and gave its recommendation in 1966. Daulat Singh Kothari was the chairperson, so it's known as Kothari Commission. And they suggested a trilingual formula. And we have already discussed about trilingual formula. If you want to go into details of it, you can watch the video on trilingual formula. And then this trilingual formula was adopted in our national, NPE, National Policy on Education, 1968. And in 1986, the second National Policy on Education came. This repeated the same verbatim and no change in the linguistic policy, language policy. And then we have NEP 2020. Again, more or less the same thing has been reasserted. But barring this protest, anti-Hindi protest in South, we have witnessed demands and underlined aspirations of speakers of different languages, and how beautifully the Constitution of India created an avenue to place these demands. We'll shortly talk about. I'm referring to 8th schedule for that matter. You can always watch the video that we did on 8th schedule of Indian Constitution. You will get to know more about it. But moving on, uh, by the way, uh, the language policy in India, the basic framework comes from the provisions as contained in Articles 343 to Article 351 of the Constitution of India, which talks about linguistic policy, language policy, and official languages. You can always refer to it. However, we have done a separate video on scheduled and non-scheduled languages and language policy and education in India. You can go and watch, and you can get to know more about it. Moving on, as we have already established in our earlier lectures, India is a multilingual country, and you know a diverse, a multilingual country with diverse languages, cultures, and practices. And rarely we find such parallel in the world. And multilingualism, multicultural phenomena in Indian society is not new. We have been staying with impeccable harmony and perfect harmony and coexistence for centuries. So this is not a new phenomenon to us. European and American scholars are shocked to see and are surprised to see this harmony, but this is a way of life for us. So multilingualism is an unmarked phenomenon as far as India is concerned, but it is an unmarked phenomenon throughout the world. However, the practices and characters are different. In India, we have a peaceful uh, coexistence, whereas in some parts of the world we find uh, a tension, linguistic tension, and lots of protests and assertions. So, in some cases, it manifests a harmonic coexistence of different languages, and in others, it turns into violent conflicts. We have already talked about, some violent agitations and movements, linguistic movements around the world. But here we will focus on India because of its history and certain uh, developments. Multilingualism in Southeast Asia and Africa has not resulted in separatist tendencies. However, in countries like Canada, Spain, Belgium, and many others, multilingualism has and assertion of linguistic identities have resulted into intense linguistic tension and a potential separatist tendency. And interestingly, USA, the United States of America, prefers not to announce a particular language, let's say English, as its official language. So, America, United States of America, has no language given official status. However, in de facto, it is English, but it's constitutionally, they have not announced like many other countries, like India for that matter, right? We have Hindi and English, right? Uh, but USA does not prefer to make it official about it. If you look at the multilingual character of India, we have to see the census data because that's the authenticated source. And again, in order to understand the multilingual character, the unverified numbers, the changing numbers, varying numbers in all census, subsequent census, studies, and reports give us an understanding that how complex the idea is to count the number of languages, because in each of the census report we find different number, different figure, which is very interesting. And just to quote a few, let me quote it from the Census of India subsequent reports. 1961 census returned 1652 mother tongues and classified them under 193 languages. Let me tell you, the census report includes only those languages which have more than 10,000 speakers. Again, those languages which have less than 10,000 speakers are not even listed. So, these figures are for those languages which have more than 10,000 speakers. So, 1961 census gives us a data of 1,652 rationalized mother tongue. Why I am saying rationalized? Because if you look at the returns, returns are far more bigger in number, but they are rationalized, designated, and they undergo linguistic scrutiny, and we arrive at rationalized mother tongue. So, 1961 gives us 1652 mother tongues, and which is further classified and categorized as 193 languages. Remember this number. Moving on, 1991 census has the raw returns of mother tongues that comes up to 10,400, and then they were subjected to thorough scrutiny and processing and result in 1576 rationalized mother tongue. Now look at 1652 in 61, and here we have 1576 rationalized mother tongue, right? And 114 languages, categorized established languages. So, from 193 languages in 61, now we have 114 languages. Census 2011 has 19,569 raw returns. What is it, this raw return? So when these enumerators and the census people come to us, we give our name of the mother tongue. There is a question number 10 in the census form, and you fill your mother tongue. So all these speakers, without any categorization and suggestion, then give the label, the name, the designation, and it is entered. That is raw return without any scrutiny. It is subjected to scrutiny and processing only after these data are collected. So if you look at the raw data, the number returned is 19,569. Can you believe? 1991 it was 10,400. 2011 we have 19,569. They were, and then we have 1369, 1369 rationalized mother tongue, and 121 languages categorized as distinct language. So 193 in 61, 114 in 91, 121 in 2011. So we can see these varying numbers, and we cannot conclude realistically. That's the question, and that gives us the picture of linguistic diversity and aspirations of the speakers for asserting their identity, linguistic identity, and the urge to be counted as speech community. That is the implication for linguistic identity, right? If you look at this data. Now, broadly, we all understand that India has many language families: Indo-European, Dravidian, Austroasiatic, Tibeto-Burmese, Semitic-Hamitic. We have already talked about linguistic diversity of India. You can always refer to the text there. Now, when we look at this multilingual character, thankfully, the Constitution of India recognizes the diversity, linguistic diversity, and diversity of culture. And from Article 343 to Article 351, we have a well laid down provision to give recognition to this multilingual fabric of the Indian society. And the most instrumental of all these provisions is Schedule 8, the 8th schedule, as we call it, of the Indian Constitution. You want to know more about 8th schedule, you can always go back to the lecture we did on 8th schedule, and you can see more, you can understand more. But as a referential note here, the 8th schedule of the Constitution of India reflects the statutory acknowledgement of Indian linguistic diversity and plurality. The growing demands for inclusion of more and more languages in schedule represent the aspiration of other languages that require institutional support and constitutional protection. Just to tell you in a nutshell, this is a provision in Indian Constitution that recognizes official languages, and they are called scheduled languages. So in 1950 we had 14, and as I am speaking in 2021, the number is 22. So 8 languages have been added to the list, and the process is on. In future, we may add some more languages because the demands are high to be included in this schedule. Very quickly, if you want to know what are these languages, which are the 22 languages, here is the list. However, the numbering and the placing of the languages in an order has no order, right? And it's purely alphabetical. So the sequencing and appearance in the sequence has nothing to do with the hierarchy, importance, and superiority. It is simply alphabetical arrangement. So we have languages like Assamese, Bengali, Bodo, Dogri, Gujarati, Hindi, Kannada, Kashmiri, Konkani, Maithili, Malayalam, Manipuri, Marathi, Nepali, Odia, Punjabi, Sanskrit, Santali, Sindhi, Tamil, Telugu, and Urdu. These are 22 languages so far. But you need to understand that there are demands and the undercurrents, specifically, in the plains where they're demanding inclusion of more languages in Schedule 8 to get institutional protection and institutional support to grow and to be registered, right, to protect their language and culture. Situation in northeastern part of India is, little, there is a little tension, linguistic tension, specifically in northeast of India, where we have variety of languages and the urge for assertion of linguistic identity. It has led to a lot of tension in the northeastern part of India, where languages are competing with each other to be counted and to be registered. But overall, we have list of 38 demands. In fact, they are not, we do not call them movements, so to say, but of course, a very strong, intense demand from these speech communities and speakers of these languages to be included in the 8th schedule, and we have undercurrents where these languages are competing and trying to occupy the public space, right? These are languages are Angika, Banjara, Bajika, Bhojpuri, Bhoti, Bhotia, Bundelkhandi, Chhattisgarhi, Dhatki, English, Gadwali, we also call it Pahadi, Gondi, Gujjar or Gujari, Ho, Kashashi, Kamatapuri, Karbi, Khasi, Kodawa or Kurg, what you call, Kokborok, Kumauni, Kuruk, Kurmali, Lepcha, Limbu, Mizo, Magahi, Mundari, Nagpuri, Nicobaris, Pahadi, Himachali, what you call, Pali, Rajasthani, Sambalpuri or Kosali, Saurseni or Prakrit, Sairaki, Tenidi, and Tulu. So these are the languages which are struggling and competing to be included in the 8th schedule of the Constitution. So, this is it for now. We need to remember that language is not simply a mark, an instrument for communication, a means for communication, but it is like an organism that grows inside us. It is a vigorous marker of our identity, right? It encodes our culture, it encodes our social structure, right? It carries our collective memories, our experiences, and common social history. It is an abstract phenomenon and it has got social indexes like, like gender, class, region, religion. Language is a very sensitive social index, and that helps us constitute a linguistic identity. And this linguistic identity is not restricted to language only, it extends to our cultural social identity, and it encodes and gives us meaning who we are. So language is a vigorous marker of identity. In India, in a pluricultural, linguistic, multilingual system and setup, we have been staying together with perfect harmony for centuries. But there are undercurrents and demands, right? And a milder form of movement to be included, registered, and recognized as a particular linguistic community, because these languages are competing. Schedule 8 gives that opportunity for institutional support and promotion, and they're competing with each other to get into that list. Uh, so this is it for now. We will meet with some other new topic in this class, in other class. For now, thank you very much.